Mr. Blinken.
Good
welcome.
to see you, Senator.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And congratulations on making it to the end of a long hearing. You know, I suspect over the next several years there may be a number of issues on which we have disagreements. But let's start on some areas where we may have some common ground. And in particular, I want to start by talking about Nord Stream 2. In the last 18 months in the Senate, we have seen remarkable bipartisan agreement when it comes to Nord Stream 2. I have authored 2 separate pieces of legislation jointly with Senator Shaheen, bipartisan legislation, both of which have passed into law, imposing strong sanctions to prevent the completion of Nord Stream 2. The first of those we passed in December, a little over a year ago. The second of those we passed just a little over a month ago. And as a consequence, a pipeline that was on the verge of being completed halted in its tracks. And when we first started taking up the Nord Stream 2 sanctions legislation, the pundits and observers all said there was no chance the sanctions would stop the pipeline. That has now been proven categorically false. The pipeline is stopped, and of course, a pipeline that is 95% complete is a pipeline that is 0% complete because it's not operational. Just this morning, the State Department announced sanctions specifically on entities, one involving a specific vessel, the Fortuna, that has been involved in Russians' attempts to complete the pipeline. Now, worryingly, there have been suggestions out of Moscow and out of Berlin that the Biden administration would reduce pressure and reduce efforts to stop Nord Stream 2. I would tell you in terms of the Senate, the sanctions legislation we passed, in order to get it passed, it received the support of virtually every member on this committee. It's received the support of both the chairman and ranking member of this committee. It received the support of both the chairman and ranking member of Senate Armed Services, the chairman and ranking member of Senate Banking, the Senate Majority Leader and the Democratic Leader, and it received the support of the same leadership in the House. And so when it comes to congressional opposition to Nord Stream 2, congressional commitment to stopping that pipeline from ever being complete, it is virtually universal, and it is bipartisan. Can you commit to this committee today that the Biden administration will hold the line, will keep the sanctions, and will prevent the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from being completed?
2 things, if I may, Senator. First of all, the President-elect strongly agrees with you that Nord Stream 2 is a bad idea, and he's been very clear about that. I need to look at the actual legislation. I'm determined to do whatever we can to prevent that completion, the last 100 yards. Very much agree. I would need to consult with the President-elect. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about this when he's president to make a determination on sanctions. In an ideal world, and we probably don't live in one, in an ideal world, we will engage very quickly with our partners and allies in Europe. And I think we would try to seek to convince them to stop this. But if that doesn't succeed, I think the tools that we have, including the tools that you provided, are something we'd have to look very seriously at. I just can't commit right now to doing that because I haven't had a chance to talk to the President-elect about it.
Well, I'll note the European Union, in terms of our partners and allies in Europe, when they voted to condemn the Nord Stream 2 project, the vote was something like 400 to 100. It was overwhelmingly to condemn the project. That being said, Angela Merkel and Germany have leaned in vigorously in support of it. And this is clearly the #1 energy priority for Putin and Russia, and it represents billions of dollars that fund Putin's aggression. Would a Biden administration be willing to stand up to German pressure? The Germans are going to press you, and you're not going to convince Merkel to change your mind on this. And so will a Biden administration be willing to stand up to that pressure, particularly when the rest of Europe recognizes how damaging completing this pipeline would be?
I know his strong conviction that this is a bad idea, the Nord Stream 2. That much I can tell you. I know that he would have us use every persuasive tool that we have to convince our friends and partners, including Germany, not to move forward with it. But what I do need to do is make sure that I've actually consulted with him on the specifics of that.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that, and I would note that both sets of sanctions we passed are mandatory and not discretionary, and so I will look forward to continuing to work with you on that. Let's shift to a second area where we may or may not get agreement. You mentioned earlier in this hearing the importance of strengthening regional allies to stand up to China. And I have long believed that China poses the single greatest geopolitical threat facing the United States for the next century. One of those important regional allies is Taiwan. When you were at the State Department, rules were put in place concerning Taiwan that put restrictions on Taiwan that no other country faces, and in particular, that prohibited the display of symbols of Taiwanese sovereignty on U.S. federal property. I've been a vocal critic of those policies, and in recent weeks, the State Department announced that it was rescinding those policies. I think that's the right thing to do, and that Taiwan we should respect and treat with respect, and I think strengthening Taiwan helps both the region and America stand up to China. What are your views today, and would you seek to go back to the old policy that's been reversed?
So a couple of things on that. I had a chance to mention this earlier. When President Tsai was running for office, I actually received her at the State Department, had a great conversation. This is some years ago. And then when she became president, I talked to her on a number of occasions. And that in and of itself, I think, is important. There is the Taiwan Assurance Act and its requirements that I think is what, in part, triggered what the State Department and Secretary Pompeo have done. I want to see that process through to conclusion, if it hasn't been concluded, to make sure that we're acting pursuant to the mandate in the Act that looks at creating more space for contacts.
All right, let's shift to another part of the world where I suspect we will have more significant disagreements, and that is Iran. You are a vocal proponent of the Obama-Biden-Iran nuclear deal. I believe that was a catastrophically misguided deal. In the 4 years since the Obama administration was in office, the United States has, of course, withdrawn from that deal. Not only that, we now know a number of facts we didn't know at the time the deal was being negotiated. One of the things, and in particular, we know the involvement of the IRGC with terrorism directly targeting Americans and murdering American servicemen and women. In 2016, Congress overwhelmingly passed CATSA, which imposed mandatory terrorism sanctions on Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And we've since discovered the vast money in Iran that is intertwined with the IRGC. In particular, the financial sector, including Iran's central bank, and the energy sector, including the National Iranian Oil Company. Both of these sectors and entities have now been sanctioned under the terrorism authorities for funneling money to the IRGC. The Pentagon also has assessed that the IRGC is responsible for killing at least 603 Americans in Iraq. Do you believe it is in America's national security interest to lift those terrorism sanctions and to allow billions of dollars to go once again to funding terrorist activities?
I do not, and I think that there is nothing, as I see it, inconsistent with making sure that we are doing everything possible, including the toughest possible sanctions, to deal with Iranian support for terrorism, its own engagement in that, and the nuclear agreement. And we've said from the outset, and we're serious about it, that the nuclear agreement was one thing, but continuing and even strengthening our ability to push back and to deal effectively with Iran's egregious behavior, including in the terrorism realm, was something that we needed and should do. Part of the challenge now, I think we have, Senators, because we've had this divorce to some extent from some of our allies and partners who ideally would be with us in pushing back against Iran's malicious activities as a result of disagreeing over getting out of the nuclear deal. We are less effective than we might otherwise be in those other areas if we were working together. I think one of the benefits, should Iran choose to come back into compliance, and we wound up doing the same thing, is that we would at least be back on the same page with allies and partners, and that might make us more effective in dealing with these problems.
You mentioned it was a priority defending LGBT rights.
Mm-hmm.
Iran's record concerning the LGBT community is horrific.
I agree with
They put to death, they execute people for the crime of being homosexual.
I agree with you.
As long as they maintain that barbaric and inhumane policy, do you think it's appropriate for a Biden administration to allow billions of dollars to go to that regime?
The challenge that I think we face, and of course, we have the biggest problem that we faced with Iran, and I think that we unfortunately continue to face, and it may get worse again, is that with regard to all of the egregious actions that Iran takes that you rightly point out across all of these areas, an Iran that has a nuclear weapon or has the capacity to develop one or the material for one in very short order risks acting with even greater impunity than it already does. So I think the first order of business has to be to get that back in the box. That puts us in a much better position to try to deal with some of these truly egregious actions.
And a final question, because my time has expired. Do you agree that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? And do you commit that the United States will keep our embassy in Jerusalem?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.